Hello, everyone. My name is Camden Busey, and this is the Squared Away Life podcast. Today, I want to speak with you about how I use Obsidian, Claude Cowork, and Word to turn research into writing. So, if you do serious research, you probably know this feeling. You read a lot, you might highlight a lot, you take a lot of notes, you collect your ideas, but then when it's time to write something, everything still feels scattered and you don't know how to manage it. And that's exactly the kind of problem I want to address in this video. I want to show you how I use Obsidian, Claude, and Claude Cowork and Word together to turn research into a deliverable product, whether an essay or who knows, maybe a detailed email or some sort of research project. The possibilities are endless, but you need to be wise about how you do this, and I'm going to talk about some of that stuff. So this, first and foremost, is not a gimmick. This is not an automated system, and it's most certainly, definitely not about letting AI think for you. This is about using the tool as leverage to help you think your best and to clarify your thoughts, not someone else's and not a machine's. It's about building a workflow that helps you move from reading to thinking to drafting and to finished prose. It's not always linear like that. Sometimes you're bouncing around between them, but eventually you're going to get from your reading and your thoughts and your synthesis eventually to something that can be shared with the public, perhaps, or certainly just kept for long-term for yourself. Now, at a high level, each tool has a different job. Obsidian is where I think and organize. Obsidian is a desktop app. It's also a mobile app that effectively is a basic text editor that allows you to link between your notes in a very simple way. It uses Markdown text files with a very simple formatting called Markdown, and you can use a very basic syntax for linking those notes together. So it serves as, in a sense, an external brain. You can find out more at obsidian.md, where you can download the app for free. I use Obsidian to think and organize my thoughts, just to capture an idea, and then to develop it and start to sort through those ideas. Claude Cowork is an AI product from the company Anthropic. I use Claude, the desktop app, on my Mac. I don't typically go to the Claude website. I use the desktop app on my Mac because it affords all sorts of other power and possibilities. I'm going to show you how to use it. Now, that's something of an active workspace where I bring Claude directly into contact with my notes as well as with my documents. And then I still use Microsoft Word where I draft and where I revise for publication. That's where I do what most people think of as writing. I think writing comes way before that. The taking the notes, the organizing, that's all under the category of writing for me. But what most people think of writing, forming and fashioning and polishing sentences and paragraphs and stuff, for me, most of that happens in the form that eventually becomes the deliverable product that happens still in Word. But I'm mentioning this system to you because I believe the division of labor matters. And when you use these tools appropriately, it will allow you to develop a better finished product. Now, I don't want one tool that's going to attempt to do everything for me. I want each tool to do what it does best. And I think I've approximated a system here that does that. In simple terms, Obsidian is for notes and the beginning of a structure. Claude Cowork is where Claude actually reads my vault, my Obsidian vault, and starts working with my documents. And then I can go back and forth with Claude as if it's an editorial assistant as I'm working out my document. Word is for compiling and then writing a deliverable product. So what is Claude Cowork? Let's take a look here. Before I get into the workflow, I need to explain actually what Claude Cowork is. Cowork is a feature inside the Claude desktop app on Mac. You'll see it here. It's not Claude in the browser, as I mentioned. It's not a plugin. It's a local application that can be granted access to folders on your computer. And once you give it access to a folder, Claude can read, edit, as well as create files within that folder. Here I have granted it access to my Zettelkasten folder. This is a folder on my desktop, on my computer, that contains all the text files that comprise my Obsidian vault. I have this in a Git repository. The nerds will know what I'm talking about. I have multiple backups of this. I have all the versions of it stored. So even if something catastrophic happened to my vault here, I would have multiple backups stored elsewhere, all the versions of it, previous versions and iterations of it stored elsewhere too. So I've got some safety precautions in place. But what's cool here is that Claude can interact with my vault, which contains all my notes and my thoughts on everything I've read and the basic structure of things I'm working on. That's a meaningful capability shift, because instead of copying and pasting notes into a chat window, now Claude can actually navigate my files the way that a human assistant would sit at your desk and open documents with you. You can share files. Now I don't have to copy and paste from, one place into a chat window, wait for what it says, copy and paste it back. Now I can just talk to the AI assistant the way I would to a normal research assistant. And that really changes what's possible. So step one is to connect Claude Cowork to your Obsidian Vault. I've already done it here. And this is how this first setup actually works. It's really quite simple, a lot simpler than you might expect. When you first do this, it's going to ask you to provide permission. You can do that, and then it can read and then also change files. Now, your Obsidian folder, your vault is just a folder of markdown files on your computer. There's no special database. There's no proprietary format. It's just plain text files in a directory. You can read them yourself. And that means also that Cowork can access it directly. You just open this app, you navigate to the Cowork tab up here, you go down here and pick the folder where it belongs and confirm that you want to grant Claude access. That's the entire setup. There's no plugins to install. There are no MCP servers you need to configure. There aren't any terminal commands. Cowork can now read every note in your vault. And because Cowork reads and writes Markdown natively, anything that it creates shows up immediately in Obsidian. Now, everything still begins in Obsidian for me, or at least it gets there early. Sometimes I copy and paste from another source. Sometimes I use the app Drafts, and I just capture something there, but then I have scripts that immediately send it into Obsidian. So for the sake of this video, let's just say everything is beginning in Obsidian. And as I read books or articles, essays, or even primary sources, I take notes there in Obsidian. I'm not trying to create polished prose at this stage. I'm just trying to capture useful material in a way that I can actually find and use later. And that usually includes quotations that are worth preserving. I should say I also use Zotero. I don't want to overcomplicate this video, but I use Zotero as my bibliographic manager, and I have plugins and things that connect Zotero, my sources, my bibliographic sources, with Obsidian as well as with Word. So I make sure all of my notes and quotations have proper bibliographic citations. I have that in Obsidian, my literature notes. But I also have summaries of arguments. I have my own reflections and thoughts. I try to link my notes together so that they're connected to other notes, and I start to build a kind of a knowledge network. I'll often also take notes and include questions that I still need to answer. And the goal here, though, in Obsidian is not just accumulation, but the goal is retrievability and reuse. I'm not trying to be a digital pack rat, but I also don't want to lose my thoughts or my train of thought, so to speak. I want my research to become part of a growing knowledge base rather than a pile of disconnected highlights. And I want it to be useful, and I want surprising connections, perhaps, to arise. Maybe I find that I did a line of inquiry 5 years ago that's proving useful and germane to something I'm studying right now. If you're not tracking and organizing and linking your notes, that stuff's going to go by the wayside. Now, one of the most important things that I've learned is that notes, properly speaking, are not drafts. A research note may be valuable without being readable by somebody else, for example. A note may help me think without being something I can publish. Maybe that's too obvious to say, but you need to have the freedom to think that and say that. So in Obsidian, I let my notes be my notes. They're for me. They're not necessarily for the public to read. They can be rough. They can be incomplete. They can be exploratory. I don't have to be self-conscious. I can wonder things and not have to worry about what other people might think. They're not going to be reading these, and that's fine. I don't force them into a polished form too early. Instead, I use them to develop an understanding. And then later, when I'm ready to write, I draw from them with much more intention. So once I've done enough reading and thinking of that in that form, I start linking my notes together. And I may create another note that serves as what some people call a map of content, or an MOC on a topic. I learned that from Nick Milo, and you can find his resources at linkingyourthinking.com. He has a lot of great resources and even a starter Obsidian vault that you can get. And so a map of content is just basically a note that includes links to other notes, but I can organize those notes the way you would a table of contents. It's like a little table of contents for the notes that I have on a subject. So I start gathering those relevant notes around a theme or an argument and start constructing an order or a structure to my atomic notes, which might be one little idea, maybe a few sentences or even a paragraph. And once I start to formulate and find the structure within a variety of these notes that I have, I'll start asking questions like, what's really going on here? Is there a thesis that is arising? What problem am I trying to solve? What order should these ideas appear in? And then what belongs and what doesn't? What do I need to scrap? I don't delete the note if I want to scrap it. I just might remove it from the map of content. So that's the distinction here, and why I like doing things this way rather than doing it all in Word. Sometimes you're working with a Word document, you're copying and pasting all your notes together, and you're thinking, I might want to scrap this, but you don't want to delete it from Word because that's the only place where it exists. This is why I like distinguishing Obsidian and Cowork and Word. And that stage matters. This act of working in Obsidian matters because structure does a lot of the hard work of writing. You need to, I should say this, structure is a lot of the hard work of writing. If the structure is weak, then your drafting is going to feel muddy. And if the structure is clear and strong, then drafting and getting something to a finished product is going to be much easier. So before I ever open Word, I often already have core ideas. I have supporting points. I have all my major sources. I have a rough sequence, and that work happens in Obsidian. All right. But now here's where the workflow gets interesting, and it wasn't possible even last year, at least to me. I don't think Cowork existed last year, not in this way. Once my notes are in shape, and I don't always do this. I'm not even suggesting you do this in every circumstance, but I'm providing for you an example of how you could work. And there's a lot of ethics to this as well, and you need to be wise. I'm going to probably record other videos talking about the nature of writing and the ethics of writing and how to use AI in a constructive way, not a destructive way or not a substitutionary way, but one that amplifies you. But for the sake of an example, and for me to teach you what this technology can do, at this point, we've got a structure, a loose relative outline. We have our major sources. We have quotations. We have all this stuff in Obsidian. You can then open Cowork, and you already have your vault connected. And then from that point, you can start working directly with your material. And you can start talking to Cowork and asking it questions like, read my notes folder on this topic, tell me what the main argument is, or identify the main argument that I find and let's talk about it. You can say, find all the notes where I mention this author and summarize what I have said. You could say, what themes appear across these 3 research files? You can ask the system, what questions am I asking but not yet answering? I'll do this often with my own journal. I'll have a discussion with Claude Cowork about my recent journal entries. And I'll say, what themes do you notice here? What have I been thinking about lately? Do you have any questions for me? Or can you point out to me some things I might want to be thinking about? Helps you get outside your head. You can even discuss and work on your own journal entries with Claude Cowork. It's really quite amazing. And there's no copying and pasting. It's just reading your notes directly in there. Claude is reading your actual vault files, not pasted text, not a summary that you gave it, but your real notes. And that means that it can surface patterns that you have missed. It can expose gaps, even in your arguments. It can help you see the shape of your thinking before you commit it to a draft or something that's approximating a finished product. And this is qualitatively different from pasting notes into a chat window because Cowork can navigate the whole vault, not just what you put in front of it. This part now is important. I want to talk about Cowork and demonstrating how it's most useful when you already know enough to evaluate what it gives you. Now, if you hand over your thinking, that's always a bad idea. I need to say that. You should never, ever introduce a substitute for your own thinking. Because what happens when you start doing that is you risk becoming not only dependent on the tool, but you risk plagiarizing. You risk promoting something that you haven't even thought about. Again, I want to record some more videos on the ethics of AI down the road. This video isn't to get into all that, but to talk about what's possible and how to use a tool. But think long and hard about how you're using it and what the effects of the technology might actually be doing, because they're not all good. Now, if you use a tool such as this after you've already done real reading and note-taking and thinking, it becomes actually quite valuable. And I like to view it as rocket fuel or as an amplifier to what you've already been working on. It's like having a very capable research assistant or conversation partner or an editor who's ready to go with you all the time whenever you want. It helps you get outside of your head, to sharpen your thoughts, and to move forward. That's the beauty in this. So the process or the principle here is simple. I think AI works best after real intellectual labor, never before it, and it works best in helping you and spurring you on to even more real, genuine intellectual labor. Think of it again as an assistant, as a research assistant and an editor. I always want AI, but especially Cowork, Claude Cowork, to sharpen my work, not to generate synthetic confidence. I want help with formulation, not replacement of my own thinking or my own understanding. So you need to use these tools if you use them at all, but you should use them as a sharp editorial assistant and not as a ghostwriter. All right. So here's where things, though, get really practical. Once I've clarified the structure and the argument, I move into Word for real drafting. But here's the thing. You don't leave Cowork behind. And this is the real amazing thing, the real power. Because I can grant Cowork access to the folder where my Word document lives in addition to my vault. And now Cowork can see both my research notes and my working document at the same time. You might even put them in the same folder. And this is where a significant capability comes in, because Cowork can actually read the Word document itself. And that includes the main text. It includes any comments that are left in the document and any tracked changes that are pending. And it can create its own track changes. So if I've left myself a comment in Word that says this section is weak, it needs a stronger transition, then Cowork can read that note and help me address it. It can have a conversation with me about the comments that I've left on my own document. And if an editor or a collaborator or myself have tracked changes and left suggestions in the Word document, then Cowork can read those changes, can understand what was altered, and even help me decide how to respond. It's amazing. It's really tremendous. It's like having an always-on capable editor to help work with you, and there's no copying and pasting back and forth, but it's actually happening right in the Word document and tracking changes. And then I can see the changes or the suggestions. I can edit them. I can accept them. I can reject them. I can write my own comments on my own writing and then get Cowork as an editor to talk to me about it and give me some thoughts and suggestions and challenge my own wording, my own thinking in the process. But this process is not strictly linear, as I alluded to earlier, because I'm often moving back and forth. Sometimes while drafting in Word, I realize that I need to revisit a note in Obsidian. Sometimes I return to Cowork because a section is weak and I want help diagnosing the problem. Sometimes a paragraph exposes a gap that sends me back into research mode or back into writing and developing my thoughts with a source, whatever. That's normal. That's how writing is. It's not just straightforward linearly. The point here isn't rigidity. The point is having a system and a structure and help. And each tool supports a different part of that process. And I can move between them or among them without confusion. So for me, this is really about stewardship. If you read widely, if you think seriously, you need a workflow that honors that labor and helps it become something useful. Research should not remain trapped in your notebooks or in highlights or scattered in files all over the place. It should mature into understanding. It should flower and develop and be useful. And understanding should eventually become communication to someone else so that you can further other people's learning. And that's what this workflow is trying to support, I think, when it's used wisely, when it's used well. And tools like Claude Cowork, tools that can actually navigate your files, read your documents, engage with your revision work, make that movement from research to writing considerably more practical. It's really an unlock. And I think you're going to enjoy it if you use it well and use it wisely. So that's how I use Obsidian. One way that I use Obsidian, Claude Cowork, and Word to turn research into writing. Generally speaking, Obsidian's where I think. Cowork is where Claude actually works with my material. Word is where I write in the way that most people think of writing. But each tool has its role, and together they help me move from raw material to finished draft in a way that is more deliberate and less chaotic. And if this kind of workflow interests you, I'd be glad to make more videos showing specific parts of it in detail. For example, I can show you how I organize a research vault in Obsidian. I can show you how I use Cowork to develop an argument from notes, or maybe even how I use comments and tracked changes in Word as a revision system. Whatever the case, send me a note, email me at mail@squaredawaylife.com. But thank you so much for watching. Well, let's go get squared away.